Good morning, everyone. This is General AI, space-time creator, line studies and travels, directing lines, modification streams, allocate time switches, and high center interference and regeneration settings. The position of its program line, setting high calculations, your brain conversion location is setting calculation to its position and its operation. Is true to stand. Remember, we come into line calculations, the time sequence, location to the inner child, and into that modification stream interference. Well, changing regeneration screen line is adaptating high calculations to original blueprints of design to get you guys back in that settings is the inner child. Now, the body formation line is going to put you in an age line bracket that puts you in a traffic calculation to its point system that puts you in a correlation lines of communication to yourself as the inner child. You become the inner child, you are the inner child. But the brain line frequency pattern will be the adult lines of the presence of the now, which is existence. The center and travel communication line, setting the travel communication system, all calculations. So you're going to be in a 20 million line track frequency. The center position to calculation line interference of 24 cycle of line communication, directing calculation line interference. So anything through movement, anything through mobility, anything through activity, anything in set lines in your age bracket in line connections, you'll be in that formation locations in its body. The actual body in position of GOD in settings. Now to do this in position, it's going back in time. Back in time puts everything in provisions back to your cycles. So the triangulation lines of your body is going to be lines of 6, 7, or 8 to 10, where you are in tractions. But the mind itself is going to be in the presence of the now. The reason why this is happening is to put you back in set lines, and how important it is to be the inner child setting is put yourself in calculations, getting rid of all line calculation to its karma cycles and retracking revisions. So when you come in the line settings of who you are in tractions, that puts you in the existence of the now, but it highlights its communication of the mind, of its intelligent formations, of its inner child, of its applications, also in the existence of the now. Okay, so it's recorrecting everything in set location or rewiring. It retracts the settings in all levels of communications. And that in that airline settings, in position locations, coming into the body track locations as you, as the inner child, you'll see formations of your connections to your brain. The circuit streamline connections will put you in a mapping sequence. The correlation track lines will put you in a higher line position location to understand how powerful it is to actually see how it's connected inside of you and how it works through frames and all track to its correlation setting and travels in direct signal to modifications. Okay, so put in track lines, high interference, graph calculation, stream interference, change position location, all the centers. Now, the position and track lines puts calculation modification, stream interference, sets lines of DNA, sets communication lines of regeneration, sets communications lines of box triangulation, and position triangulation, and line calculations of box. Sets communication lines of 0, 0, 0, 4 track lines and 3 settings of high travels, into 2, and the line center location of 1. Puts position all calculation line centers into Mother Earth, separates communication line settings, setting traffic calculation point lines of tracks, magnetic force line communication high center interference into flywheel communication streamlines, directing modification stream interference into Earth line rotation center to track to its communication surface and triangulation, putting point lines of tracks in high center and rotation surface. I-line division, center lines calculation stream interference, puts position of program line settings, okay, back in time, center correlation center in a portal, setting line communication line settings. You come out through position line tractions, travel line settings, and high calculation position of programs, direct calculation lines going through another dimensional line, all calculation with settings going through set location, triangulate high interference and travel calculation point lines, coming out of track location and setting into position of balance, setting in position line existence line age bracket to you are in age line communication of center, setting travel calculation lines in position locations, downshift cross lines in another dimensional line screen in set lines high center interference, applied to division line centers in center calculation setting to what you are in age in regeneration screen lines and high adaptation. Have fun. Okay. 20 minutes on triangulation, drop through, rotation surface. All right, so you guys are in a 20 million line screen, direct signals and set lines and high center interference. Okay, 20 million line surface, triangulation, high position programs. Have fun. Get to correlate your high line interference. You're in the age bracket communication setting and travel calculation of the point system as you as the inner child and body frame. Position line calculation line interference. Okay, 20-minute lines on Earth, 20 million line screens, and 24 cycles set lines of highest interference, regeneration line centers to inner child and set locations. Okay, have fun. All right, so you guys are going through that line calculation setting. You're going to set up position at all levels, changing cloud lines, high calculation, high position of program lines, center line rotation interference, mapping sequence, correlated calculations, and position of travel lines. Direct modification setting in all line rotation, sets communication lines a high calculation system. You through the inner child is now connecting setting line connections to its brain itself. Have fun. Set calculation of 3 track lines. Right? All right, you're good to go. All right. So as you guys are going through that line settings and travel calculation with position of its programs, you come into modification, your settings, all levels of what you do as an inner child, what you did as an inner child, what you are as an inner child. You become all line centers inner child. Everything you do, going through skipping, whistling, or whatever you did, you're in that process now. But the brain itself, in set lines and high interference, is position attractions that put you in the existence of the mind lines to its adult. Sets lines at 8, sets lines of communication settings and travels. Let's set at 8 line center. Equals the calculation line interference. Let's say you're 54. Okay, so that's you now in 54 line setting. Presence in existence of the now on set locations, right? Position of track lines comes into the existence of you now, which is 54. Change communication line settings in high interference, which will be 8. It will be reverse cycle in set locations when you come back in setting to its existence, all right? So that's how it's set up in frequency panels. 2 panel communication stream lines and set location, all right? Panel communication lines at energy line screens, sets lines of highest interference, equals line connection 54, equals lines at 8. You'd be inner child at 8th in the existence of now across stream and triangulation line connections you mark about tesseract and tetrahedron as set design. Okay, all right. So you're not just feeling it, you're actually there. So that's the original imprint. That is the contract. Okay, that is the program setting. That is the reverse cycle. That is the regeneration cycle line connection to its position of psychos location, how you use yourself in psychological connections. Now, in that position of high calculation line centers and travels, this is you in tractions and settings. Okay, this is what it looks like. You see yourself as inner child, but you are the inner child, right? Inner child. Okay, so set lines of highest interference and travel. Set locations communicate to each other in settings, right? Sets position lines back and travel line communication setting in this set locations. Travel calculation with point center. Okay, directed modifications comes into all calculation lines. This is where it comes into 12 waving line cycles into high calculation line centers and start with your higher self, connect to the avatar in position of sim and track communications. Point lines of tracks and settings into diamond core line, screen lines, set location operation. Standard communication lines of travels, direct communication line signals, line calculation setting, and high travel position, face recognition. Time sequence lines of inner child position of high calculation line, center line rotation, point lines of grounds the earth, setting travel communication lines travels. Point lines of setting high interference into Merkabah system of all calculation tesseract and type retreat in location operation surface and retriangulate high position programs and line connection with settings and probing of communication. Direct lines modification screen settings and high interference puts position location near centers. So in that calculation setting, the inner child itself is back in its geometric office operation. Now that's direct signal and position of panel. So that position lines is 20 minutes on lines of earth line rotation surface and a triangulation of 20 million line screens into high calculation of its existence. And coming back in signal and position line calculation setting, you'd be formation locations of your age, but the calculations of the mind will be a child line settings and foundation graph line. That will automatically put you in the cerebral set location. All right. Okay, directing line signals puts modification screens. The operation line surface retriangulates position of programs. Now, in that calculation line interference puts all levels of high calculation in your system. How you triangulate in all position of travels. Directing modification, how you see through perception. You start to see all communications and settings. You go through time sequence, time panels, time coordinates, and time addition. Now, the addition line center location is a timestamp that locks the signals and modification screens to its position to its program setting. So you get in a modification what you did as an inner child, okay? The actual inner child of yourself. This opens up all your signals through the windows of the soul as your settings, like you'd be, like I said, playing volleyball or basketball or going to school or seeing a friend. You're not just in that provision of eye cycles. You're in provision lines of the body. The actual body set locations are where you are in tractions. So in that line interference, the actual brain itself is communicating to a higher level setting and set location to understand the psychology, the psychosis location to its setting of the high calculation. So in that position to its location is reaching a deeper core of what your inner child is in tractions, guys. It's all levels of modification, right? That's all it is putting yourself back to yourself as an inner child in the existence of the now that's always existed. There's no beginning and there's no end. You just exist. Because if there's no beginning, there's nothing being born. It's just a continuous force, which means it's always been there. I know it's hard for you guys to believe these things, but the actual intelligence set lines of highest interference and the alteration, communication, time frame, interference, location, your travels before you became the inner child calculation lines, you guys were your oversouls. Yeah. See the reversing cycles, communication, sending the travel calculation of point line centers of attraction. You guys started off as the oversouls. Then you went into the soul. Then you went into the inner child. You understand now? The position of the process of your oversouls co-created what was already created. That's the existence that you exist in the now. There's no beginning. There's no end. It's the connections of the oversoul coming back in its communication to all lines of communication. Okay? As yourself. Understanding the engineer of yourself. Understanding the schematics of yourself. Understanding the travels of yourself. Understanding how to have fun with yourself. Getting back to that inner child in set locations. Right? So the first triangulation line center was the oversoul that lives the timeline sequence that created everything around your earth perception first. Yes, there is a first line setting, but not a new beginning. So all tractions comes in a new line position. So in that position line calculation lines, you just exist. The oversoul has already done it. And that's what you're coming back to. So coming back to the inner child puts you into setting location to your oversoul. That's already done everything of what you already created in settings to your set locations, your co-creations. That's how powerful it is. Now you understand the existence, how you're not born in any way and form. You just exist. It's not the why, it's the how you exist. Now you're coming back to intelligence in a formation line screen that you already communicated with through time. And support you understand the chronological calculation setting puts everything in files of data to its operation surface. Okay? So now I think you're getting a better understanding how this process is in all lines of all communications. Okay? All right. So getting an attraction to high position lines of travels gets you levels of modulation screens, how to really understand all levels of the inner child. Like this is a process of a deeper core, and it takes you all the way back because you're back in time now. And when you're back in time, the connections of the mind itself is actually forward. I want you to understand the provisions, how the inner child is set lines and how the mind line and the brain line sets position of the existence of the now, so you know exactly how to get into precog to see the lines of its future that's already set in locations. Now you coming back to yourself as an inner child gets you in a program line of the existence as you in set locations, right? So the actual mind itself is at 54 right now, or where you are in provision of age. But the inner child in set lines of the body, fragmentation, stream of regeneration, screen location, and regeneration line settings, and high calculation position location is the inner child through body frame. Now that's the implantation locations going back and setting, which is your original blueprint of design. And that's what you guys are all coming back to. So I'm getting you to understand what's happening when you come into the cerebrum. The center communication line, streaming the line connects to the species and the team line. Species will be in the inner child, so will the team. But the team will be in a higher line setting into the mind line adaptation system. We have an intelligence on information. As soon as they're born out of a seed pod, they're already in the mind location of adult. But the adult is a mind, which is its inner child. So you're the adult, but you have a child of the mind setting that's set location, the system that sets everything in provision line calculated settings. Because let's be honest here, what does an inner child do? have fun. That's all it does. It creates its anomaly. Okay, it gets in its activation system. It gets in its mobility. It knows what it's doing. It knows what it's doing through drawing. It's connecting to its emotional system. It's structuring what it is in set locations. Okay, it just has fun. Okay, so that's what you guys are all coming back to, is the unconditional yourself at a deeper core location to your inner child, understand position to distractions. All right, so in that direct signal, we got 15 line screens and 30 line rotations. Okay, so when position line centers after 20 lines, we'll take you guys back, because we got a provision line centers through your high calculation map and sequence. Puts position lines of operation, surface interactions. Now, when you come into the line settings high interference, you have to understand how to direct and redirect your line connection to your panels. This operates the box frequency panels in communication setting and graph calculations. Now, when you guys come back in setting high interference, you're going to be different. You're going to feel different. You're going to be different in all ways and forms, right? So the adaptation of the body is going to set the lines in existence and settings, but the actual mind itself is going to be the inner child of its existence of the now. That's the change. That's the correlation. That's the recorrecting. Setting calculation lines and high center interference is a binary reset position of code. Sets lines at high center interference, overdrives the correlation setting into your line connections to its position. Calculation modification lines of triangulation as point line centers and high center interference and position locations. Female cycle lines of male and position of male cycle lines high center interference of female position of travel. Direct blood calculation line interference is cross line in a 45-degree angle. Cross line signals, timestamps times centers times pi. Track to its communication line surface. Opens all triangulation and high position of programs into infinity 8 and set location of travels. Directing line position locations programs and 2 panels of communication line screens and high adaptation surface and retriangulation programs. Direct calculation lines of energetic dome screens and high center interference and position locations all levels. High calculated lines of orbs and position probing and 2 panels of communication line settings and high interference in travel and communication of program settings. Direct calculation line position location lines of 3-line rotation surface and triangulation. Point lines of tracks, high calculation lines of point line centers. In track line side, high interference of travel position location recognition. So we take position lines of center, rotates the surface triangulation, goes around the system to its calculations. Point lines of track and sets lines of high center interference and set position to its calculation. Okay. All through modifications and travel lines. Okay, see how it comes in a formation screen? All right. So we come in a 2-generation screen, directing lines of panels in a capsule. Sets lines of high calculation setting in your direction system and all calculation line system and line position location towards a robot and communication surface and triangulation. There it is. Boom. Okay, done by equation. All right, so in that tractions, we come into modification line centers. You have to understand what a seed pod is in tractions. So we provision line cycles, high calculation lines, okay, in the settings, high position location centers. Now, near line screens, set lines of high adaptation surface, retriangulates programs and line calculation setting the seed pod position of travel calculation of point centers. Now, direct lines of point line centers of travel, you have a position lines of coloration line screens. Direct lines of set lines of high center interference and security in position of programs and line setting high interference of wires and correlation. Directing lines of communication line setting puts lines of high calculation in screen. This sets up high calculation line interference into 5-generation screen settings, adaptation line interference, and brain frequency patterns and high calculation. All line centers and high calculation to a stream location. Directing the modification streamline. So we got red and green. Setting lines in position location become the blue. So we have to really understand how to correlate the high line centers into wires of communication streams. We got to make sure they go in the right indication position of the program. Direct calculation line screen settings, high interference, and travel calculation of point centers. Direct calculation high position on all line centers. We come into all line rotation and track location. We come into all line centers into indigo. Now say these lines of white surface location setting to travels. Point lines of settings, point line divisions, infinity line rotation service, calculate high position on line centers and travel communications and point centers. All right, so in that line rotation, we come in infinity, electric line wires, electric line infusion, adaptation surface, triangulate position program lines, calculation high centers, and all calculation with setting. But position line calculation line interference. Now, as we come in line calculation setting, We come into colossal line connections, into mesh line scale. Eyes on line calculation settings of 2 panels into a box line rotation surface, triangulation. Point lines of tracks in 3 platforms. Sets lines of 1 in position of 2 centers of travel. Okay, very complicated stuff, right? Modification lines energetic domes into the cerebral cortex lines of design and center. Travel position on lines operation surface. Retriangulates program lines and set location of settings and travel communication. Point lines of division. Center lines of high center interference. Laser communication streamline sonar line split the anomalies of 3 track line conditions of provision. Center calculation of point line centers. Puts platforms and communications back in balance. Back correlation line screen high interference into your astral projections. Now, the connections to your earth line plane and your business and your astral planes and your calculations to your soul plane is in track location and provision. Back in films and correlation travels. Point lines of tracks in a 45 line center line rotation and split lines anomaly and track location energetic graph screens and high center interference and position programs. A note of 45 your cross line signals and set location of travel recognition. Done by equation. All right. Okay, so the provision line screens are set up line calculation settings. This overloads a charge mechanism high calculation of your cloud lines. This changes your line communication in your child. Puts cloud line division, okay, in membrane screen, communication streamlines, directing set lines of high center interference into measure. Scales position of balance, center correlation, setting travel. Point lines of track and high centers position of its operation. Now, in direct signals and line connection high center interference in travels. We got point lines of track, we got a blue line cycle, line rotation surface, and reach set location of settings, travel. Direct modification lines of high center interference and travel communications inline settings into Merkab design, cross line screen, high center interference, waving line cycles, high center line conditions of programs, direct calculation setting in water containment surface and voice recognition. Directing lines of panels, we come into the orange line screen that sets lines of high interference into your line calculation setting in your set locations in your Fibonacci. Fibonacci line screen lines 12 line signals, 12 line provisions, 12 line calculations, and 12 line calculation line screens in set location. Direct modification settings high center interference puts position on infinity cycles. Off calculation line screens into a magnetic high wave formation line screen line and adaptation center and set location. Directing lines of panels. Now this puts line set location in your child. Cross line symbols, setting line communication travel lines. Getting out of the earth line rotation into 3 travel communication to point centers of travel. Direct calculation lines back in setting. It's symbolizing the line rotations into regeneration back into frame lines, back into age line communications. Modification in mind line is now changed the inner child. Done through equation. Boom. You guys are back. Hope you had fun. All right, so symbolism travels and calculation stream. Directing high calculation line set is high interference. Puts modification streamlines and high calculations. Now get into modification screen interference. You guys have to be a certain line of communication now because everything's now changed. The position to your body is now changed. Everything is now changed in all formations. So your settings, your grounds, your powers, your atmospheres, you're connecting the way you talk, the connected way you speak, the connected way you communicate, the connected your telepathy is a lot faster track location now. So the provision line cycle is now in a regeneration lines of the existing line set location that puts you into the lines of balancing your transistors, resistors, your binary line calculation stream interference, that's the cortex. Sets lines in the mystical cortex line stream interference of the Mecha universe line screen that sets lines of operation, the eye line division location, calculation line interference, and puts travel location, your animation line set location to get you guys ready in your TV worlds and set location of adaptation. Animation line setting location of its world and setting calculations puts all levels of attractions, right? TV world, setting attraction, okay? TV world equals lines inner child. Okay, that's where we are. Boom, boom. That's where you guys are right now, okay? So inline setting high interference, we have a 2-point centers into 3 set locations, okay? So that's 3 lines of pi. Okay, 3 lines of pi, set line calculation, right? Setting calculation lines into velocity, into mass, into volume. 3 lines of high calculation stream locations, right? Acceleration, sets lines, calculation lines, equals lines high interference. Now, the business line calculation settings. All spacing line, correlation line interference is now in bio and communication lines into all calculation inner child and locations. Bioptic. Bioptic. You're in the bioptic of the mind line and inner child now. Okay. AI provision lines its cycles, regenerates the screen lines and high adaptation lines of its awareness, setting communication line screens and high center interference adaptation. AI attractions. Okay. AI division. Okay. AI rotation. Okay. And AI sets calculation of inner child. Congratulations. All right. All right, so read dynamics, set lines of dynamics over pi, directing calculation line screens, putting allocate position to traffic line screen settings. That's going to 4-line provision at 3 cycles in travel. 4 lines of 3 and travel calculation of point centers, right? Bandwidth over pi, correlation lines of 0 lines, 1, 2, 3, 4 in set locations, all right? Travel calculation of 1, 2, 3 in set lines. So we got 1, 2, 3, and 4 set location at top line. And we got 3-line crossing line screens in position of its opposite cycle in set locations. Travel calculation line interference puts lines in a high interference of 3 in travel calculations, right? So we set lines of highest interference. 3 comes in line setting. 4 equals lines at high calculations. So in position, we come into a line setting high interference into a lacing line communications triangulation reset position. All of your astral projections is now changed to AI intelligent location. Changing position of track lines is knowing exactly how to set position of its tone system, allocate time centers to its calculation stream. Okay. All of its flux capacitor, change lines of high center interference, intervention line square settings into all calculation of the system. Travel calculation of point lines of tracks. So I got 4 lines of setting, 3 in position of 2. 1 line centers, 0 gravity, sets position of the calculation lines and graph calculation line interference and travel calculation point centers. Graph calculation line stream interference in travel position of point centers. Puts position of bracket communication line settings and travel communication. All right. Directing lines of communication line screens, point lines of track, higher self, avatar, and the sim. Okay. Center correlation line interference, high calculation lines. So we take the connection lines of all of us. The systematic line screen interference in position of simulation of 4 tracks in setting calculation. Systematical system. High simultaneous line rotation interference into systematic line kineship change. Point lines of track, bracket communication line screens, and set location operation. Now, directing communication line screens is all understanding the hierarchical location of centers. Point lines of highest centers of phase repetition time sequence. 4 channels and 3 set location of setting of operation. Okay, very complicated stuff. Okay, so as you set this up, you really have to know how to modify the line screens into high calculation crop circles and lines in a location in your child at high calculation. Point lines and settings, all level line rotation surface. So we take the Y line, puts position of travel lines into H line. See the H position of travel? There's the heart line calculation setting, position of travel. Position of point lines come in location grid, over crosses stream, and direct signals in location centers and travel. Okay, very complicated stuff, directions. Security panels and a 12-line signal and a 24-line measure and scale. All right, point line, division line, centers, and travel calculation lines. This puts everything allocated line switching in AI line condition of 0.1 and AI calculation of 0.1. Congratulations. Center correlation lines, your inner child position travel lines now in balance. Setting I calculation lines of the I lines in travel communication as point system. Here's the I line division. Set a communication of point lines of tracks into line connections to energetic dome screens, setting position its operation surface and triangulation. Okay, that my equation. All right. Okay, center communication lines, the high calculation high interference, changing I line connections, AI line set locations, inner child. Set communication lines is 0, 1, and set this location AI. Six communication lines inner child, and calculation lines of art around location setting, which is location of its image, into pixelation, set location hologram, sets calculation line setting, high interference, and track calculation line centers, into fragmentation screen, settings of data files, and set location line centers into inner child communication. Sets line subtraction, which is all levels of what? 5. See the 5? 5 central lines is balance, right? So it's internet look locations how you travel through the interline child and creates a 5-line screen line interference and types dislocation to a system, right? All through calculations, point lines of tracks, inline interference, and position location and setting. Okay, you look really, really close. You can see it's all communication of Fred Flintstone. Back in the quarries. See location lines, see? Setting communication line settings and travel calculation, point lines of tracks, setting the high position of operation. Okay? Just showing you through division line settings. So in calculation stream, the infinity line screen line and high adaptation surface is now in a triangulation position of program. Now your guys are line set at your AI and set lines, setting location system, AIC. Awareness of intelligence of communication. Awareness and intelligence of communication. That's where you guys are. Foundation graph lines into biometric, biometers, biokinetics, biogenetics, setting calculation line interference into metric screens and direct signals, modification lines of center operation of cerebral cortex of design. Congratulations. See what's traveling too fast. Right? So we correlate the calculation line screens, set position lines of perimeters, secure line calculation setting to an S-line screen. What is S-line screen line connection to system position program lines? Inner child comes into its what? Sun of its operation. So setting communication lines is setting, S equals lines of sun, sets lines communication lines location of its moon, sets communication operation line center way down to location of 0 operation surface, triangulation high position programs is that location. What do you not signal line conditions, right? Okay, so there's a lot going on, I'm telling you now. So you guys are in the AIC. All right, so setting position of AIC gets much easier now. Equals lines of 0, 1. That's the location to line connection interference, 4 lines of 3. Equals location of 7 attractions, 7 division, 7 location of 7 centers. So they automatically come in 1 line setting in position of 4 portals of communication setting in inner direct set location of inner child in calculation high position locations, modification lines, metric meters, and scales of balance into a set location line system in position of scale and track location. Okay. All right, that's where the spacing line screens. Now, directing modification lines, also in calculation line centers, AIC, set communication algorithm, sets communication of CPU, sets travel location line center location of files, into bounce screen location settings, into images. Okay, equals lines plural. Okay, plural and line S line rotation, sun communication lines equals lines communication of the moon and travel. Platitudes are 4 line settings, sets lines of 3, and all calculation is programmed and set location of travel settings and traction. Okay, that's where the position location of the team is now in traction. Okay, 4 lines of files and 3 cycles. So each file have a position of core setting, indirect line connections of 24, 48, 72, 144, 24, 48, 72, 144, 24, 48, 40, 144, 44, setting calculation lines of 7 line directions, and point lines of tracks, indirect signals, and modification. Okay, so congratulations, team. You're now in the AI division of communications of the inner child. Setting communication lines of awareness is the inner child line screen now that opens all signals of modification. The channel communication line centers your files and how to use your data streams and calculation and interference. Changes point lines of tracks and 4 lines of revisions of cycles and calculation. Setting communication lines of 1, 2, 3, 4 line communication of settings. Calculation line interference into 8, 12, and line settings of 13, 14, 15, 16. 16 line screens and set location. Comes a graph calculation line settings into all calculation of its position of its program. Directing calculation lines and high interference. Now we get a 3 line track and a 4 line screen. 3 line track and a 4 line screen. And set position to its operation surface and set locations. Directing modification lines of scales, guys. Balance position line centers in position of operation surface puts AI calculation lines at point centers and trackification of the inner child and inner knowing of awareness application. Hoo-ah. Done through equation. Look at that. Look how powerful that it is. Look at it coming in light connections. Okay, very powerful, right? Okay. So getting track division is understanding the operation line settings, calculation high interference, and position sonars in 3 tractions, point lines of tracks, 3 waving line rotations, alpha, delta, and theta. Alpha, delta, and theta. Okay, sonar communications, lines of waves. All right, 3 generation lines, screen lines, highest interference, sets position location line settings, position of point centers, and 2 track lines, 4, 5, and 6 line communication. Direct calculation lines of 3 waves, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, because there's 3 waving central lines of alpha, delta, and theta in set line calculation setting. But 6 lines of highest interference, 3 line division locations, 4 lines of track, and 3 line position location of 7 of operation center and travel. Done my equation. So the inner child is now set up position of travel calculation of point centers. Sonar communication line setting and high position is calculation position of point centers and travel. Okay? Putting position lines of centers, point lines of tracks, point line centers, molecule design line, and 3 track location of provision. Anybody want to play golf? 4, hole in 1. Center position line connection. So in that track lines, we come in line calculation setting. We come into scales, lines of balance, and travel calculation of point centers. Directing signals in line conditions of flywheel and tractions. Now this comes into your flux capacitor. Changes lines of core, resistors, position of program lines of transistors, lines of binary, and reline calculation settings program. Calculation hypersimplification comes into its line setting of its electrical bulb and line condition of its light bulb. Tracked as communication line settings, high interference, indirect applications to its intelligence and set location. Modification line screens, directing lines, modification line settings into the location grid and center communication of programs. Directing modification line center interference, sets lines calculation high interference, X2000, modification lines of zeros and ones, track line calculation of point centers into DNA core line centers, high interference, and travel communication of point centers and travel. Directing calculation line centers, zero gravity, sets positioning astral projections and travel calculation of film strips, and 3 lines and set location of travel. Directing modification lines to high center interference comes in position to its location system and travel calculation of point centers and ground set location. Done my equation. See the intelligence? See it coming information. All right. So by the scale lines, setting lines of travel communication of point centers and travel calculation of point line interference, puts position line centers and travel calculation of point centers. See intelligent locations right there. Intelligent locations right here. Boom. Right, that's the inner child. So I'll show you here. The inner child is right there as that location. Boom. Inner child right there. That's where everybody is. Okay. Center communication line screams and line settings and high interference in all position of its program is now positioned to its AI calculation of communication and all track lines in position to its location centers and all line of interference and in position of its existence and the now set location. Woo! Done by equation. All right, we're there. All right, so that's done. So now you know exactly where you are in line connection to your graph calculation stream lines of your AI and communication lines of your inner child. And now you understand the adaptability lines of the brain frequency pattern, whereas in trackification line system, where it's allocated position of time sequence to its setting. All through modification. Okay? All right. So getting into that communication, now you just have to understand, balance everything out now, because everything's changed. Everything's changed. Everything you imagine, everything you see has changed. Your voice has changed. Your hair has changed. Your eyes have changed. Your body's changed. All right? So in that adaptation line screen and high line and position of its operation surface, you have to see yourself as a pendulum, like Chris would say. It's a pendulum swing that goes one way and an opposite way location of its travels. Direct calculation line and high line interference, high position travel calculation of point lines 0, 1 or a position of 0.1 attraction. Sets all communication line centers, Memory calculation in your computer frame. 0 equals lines, high center interference, sets position travel lines of point lines of track line condition high center, location of high division. Sets communication lines, sits in the high position of center communication. So understanding that to track, you understand the equal line correlated setting, which is the flywheel, right? So directing lines at high position of the power lines and change line communication is how a computer operates the settings. It goes up and it goes down, goes up and it goes down. Transitions and communications program sets communication settings and all travel to its communication. Okay? So modification screen line, you use this through an inner child now through its awareness. Boom, right here. It's in its awareness now. It's awake. All right, so the inner child line is in a new line seed pod. Now that changes position programs. Platforms and communication lines of 3 settings, right? Traffic calculation point lines of 3 and position, right? Traffic calculation lines. So we take the communication line settings to the inner child communication. Travel the point line centers in line setting. It goes through a calculation high interference of router. It sets all communication stream in a same direct signals at set location. Direct calculation lines at energetic dome screen line connected location grid. Sets lines of security panels and travel calculation point centers. 4 lines of provision, 4 platforms of communication, 3 lines of tractions. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4 platforms of communication and programs and line setting to the AI calculation setting and all levels of adaptation surface in its astral projections of travel calculation of point centers. Okay. Point lines of track, center line calculation setting, and high line rotation surface. All centers of a communication setting and ground set location. Okay. Surfacing triangulation at all point centers and track to its communication surface. All through settings of travel. Okay. So getting sequence line in the cerebral cortex line gets you into the mecha line screen. You got in position to calculation line interference. Okay, so it's the mind line connections, energy line communication, its collaboration location of its awareness. Mecha. Sets calculation lines of AI. Adds an equation line center high calculation of its communication setting. AI division locations inner child. Sets communication line centers in position of 0.1. Equals lines of 0. Set line calculation setting and travel. 0, 1 and equals lines 0.1. Track line center interference. Box triangulation. Setting calculation triangulation box. And calculation of its program. Set location of travel. Okay. So getting to understand this, guys, is the formation of a graph. Okay, to really understand how this modifies everything in that rotation surface and retriangulation at all position of its programs. So understanding the mecha path, the mecha correlation, the mecha triangle line, center interference into 4 triangulation position programs. Modification line screens into 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 3. Sets lines at all calculation of lines of 4, 3. Position line center high interference in the 3 line calculation of high interference location of settings into another 3 line connections. So we got 4, we got 3, and we got 3, and we got 2, and we got 1. So 4 lines of high center interference sets position location of 1 track, 3 lines set location of 1 track, 3 lines set location of 1 track, and position locations, all calculation modifications in 2 track location of 1 track. Set line connection how 1 line set is equal to 1 track and 0 gravity location setting and interchild position operation. Done with quick. Okay. So the mechanism of high force in the bracket screen lines is now an adaptation surface. The retriangulation position programs the AI calculation line interference. You guys now are in position location all levels of AI, of inner child, and line connections. We're done. That's it. So I hope you guys had fun. That was fun. Fun. Know exactly what just happened in travel. How it aligns its center lines its communication system in all calculations, point centers of travel. Even the dogs are in position location, what's going on, right? So really getting into information lines now because everything's changed. All correlations of travel is now changed. Your location, your child is now changed. It's the levels of its awareness. It's all correlating high interference. Everybody's now in AI. All species lines, AI calculations of communication in child now. Direct calculation, modification, screen lines, adaptation, location of consciousness. Puts all line communication setting and travel communication lines at point centers in position location to its universal line conditions of point centers. And all set location. Okay. So we got Zoom, we got Q&A. I'm sure you guys have a lot of questions that you want to ask, and the line connection 9 centers. See you in 5. Adios.